What's going on, everyone? So I've been getting a ton of comments about how do we tackle the top meta decks. And of course, I could sit here and say, well, if you want to beat Quinlan, you should just bring Quinlan and win your tournament. And to be honest, there's a reason why they're meta, okay? If you want to win a tournament, you should bring Quinlan, or you should bring Cad Bane, or whatever it is. But if you're looking to maybe have a chance and take down some of the best decks, maybe with a list that's a little bit lesser known, what I would consider A tier or tier 1 list, this is where some of these lists that we're going to talk about today come in. These are oftentimes based on the win rates that we've seen in some of the major tournaments so far. Lists that came in and did surprisingly well against some. And of course, you're going to have a little bit more of a bad matchup overall in the meta, most likely, unless you're expecting a huge surge of these certain decks that they're intended to have a good matchup against. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it with a big thank you from me to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you for supporting the channel. It's been a lot of fun. I just introduced the reward structure that we have been working on with all the tournaments. So we play in tournaments and you can get rewards from me personally, which is a lot of fun. Check it out in the links down below. But let's dive into our first meta deck. And the first one to start us off, we've got Bossk Green. Now, this is a list that I've been a huge fan of since set 2. And to be honest, the list has been, well, pretty much consistent across since set 2. There hasn't been a ton of new additions since it is built around the bounty system. But just the overall game plan of this deck works extremely well up against Quinlan Red. So if you're looking to have a slightly favorable matchup up against Quinlan, just based on all the games that we've seen so far, this is going to be an option for you. The reason being is Quinlan is mainly focused up against a lot of early game disruption into mid game disruption. The early game disruption is really based around the Tarkin Town plus Quinlan's ability. And with Bossk, you are not using a lot of early game units to get your advantage. There's a couple in here, but mainly we're using early game bounties to keep pace and remove units from our opponent, as well as ramp into way more powerful things so that Tarkin Town doesn't actually matter nearly as much. But then also, Quinlan's plan is after they've dominated the early game with Tarkin Town plus their Quinlan ability, they're going to be using things like Kira, Ahsoka, those types of units to potentially stall out your game plan. Now, the reason why we're able to compete is we have so many answers in the mid game and we ramp so quickly with things like Price on your head or even your Super Laser Technician plus resupplies. Combine that with a bunch of removal to go ahead and remove these early game threats and an early deploy Bossk, we can actually fight through the Kiras and the Ahsokas and all that disruption that we have in the mid game by having multiple powerful threats in 3 copies of Vader, 3 copies of Maul, 2 copies of Palpatine, 2 copies of Reinforced Walker, 3 copies of Crate Dragon, which we can get to extremely quickly. But also we are playing with Overwhelming Barrage, one of the better uncommons, and I completely snubbed on my top 10 uncommons list, by the way, guys. This should have been on there. I cannot believe it didn't I didn't put it on the top 10 list. It should have been on there. But also we've got the Bounty Hunter's Quarry to really generate a ton of value. Yes, the Tarkin Town is going to be something that they could potentially use, but it's going to really stall them out because with Bounty Hunter's Quarry double claim, we can potentially put multiple Sentinels, Black Sun Starfighter being a Sentinel in space. And then when we do get to 7 resources, we just start dominating them. And we're going to get to 7 resources by the time they have things like maybe 4 resources, 5 resources on the board, because we're going to be ramping so quickly with Super Laser Technician and Price on your heads to where it's going to be really, really quick when we can go in and deploy these larger threats. And then when they get to 7 resources, we're deploying Crate Dragons. So they're big, heavy hitters in the late game, like Han, Enfys Nest, or anything like that. Guess what? It doesn't do anything when you deploy a Crate Dragon and you just end the game extremely quickly. So Bossk, definitely a really solid list. And really the list that you kind of have to be a little bit more afraid of with Bossk Green are those hyper aggressive lists. Something like a Sabine can be a little bit more of a tough matchup, mainly because it just sizes really well for Sabine, Bossk that is. pose. Records can be a little bit tricky. So although you have a better matchup up against Quinlan, you might struggle a little bit more against Sabine, and therefore this is the reason why it's not like completely dominating the meta or anything like that, but just something to keep in mind. It does actually have a pretty good matchup against Quinlan. Next one is Gar Yellow. Now, honestly, this one might just be a list that people know about these days, because I've been talking about Gar Saxon the entire time we've been in set 4, and I keep pushing it. And realistically, if I had recorded this video maybe before this weekend, it would have been a little bit more the unknown status, but I think people are knowing about it and they're trying it out. And guess what? It's pretty good. I do think it's still more the tier 1 status, but this list is exceptional and can be one of the most explosive decks in the game right now, with something like a Director Krennic 3/2 shielded plus Greedo on turn 1. But this list is actually really good up against Sabine, which is a little bit surprising. It's actually got a pretty good moon up against Sabine. And the main reason is all of your units just size up so well up against Sabine's units and stick around, which is really key. But also, we have a little bit of token hate with the wing leaders that they're playing, or potentially metal ceremonies in some lists. Guess what? We can go ahead and yoink those with our shuttle, which is extremely powerful. But then on top of that, we have a lot of exhaust potential. The overall plan with Gar Saxon is really we kill their units and our units live because of shield tokens. That's really the basic premise, right? Turn 1, we have Crafty Smuggler and Director Krennic, which are 3/2s, which means they kill Sabine. They kill your Battlefield Marine. Now, I will say you got to be careful about Crafty Smuggler, because if they do play Sabine, it will be good for them since they get to ping off the shield and then attack. And the same thing goes for Krennic, but you just got to be careful in that, because you could also follow up that with things like your Greedos, your Cartel Spacers are still extremely good at exhausting things. Inferno 4 along with Krennic can get you a resource discount. 7th Fleet becomes a 4/2, which is a really nice stat line in the space arena. A Router of Outlaws is a 4/3. Again, a really nice stat line to deal with K2SO and things like that. We've got things like Iden to go ahead and just completely dominate space arena, or just be a 5/3 shielded, which can be obnoxious. Asteroid Sanctuary, giving shield tokens to your own units while exhausting opponents' units, can be really useful in the short term. Snapshot Reflexes, again, just giving a pump up for one of our units and trading off with other units. But then, even though we can trade off with units in the early game up against Sabine, and that can be a completely viable strategy, the other thing is we can actually race Sabine pretty nicely, which might be a little bit surprising. But if you go 3/2 into, upgrade into Commandeer or one of their big units, or just No Good to Me Dead or Asteroid Sanctuary, exhausting out their units while we beat down, because we have a 30 HP base and they're going to be running ECL, it's going to be something that we can actually compete with. Especially with Krennic. This is what gives that option. When you have Krennic on turn 1 and you go with the Greedo plus Krennic turn 1, or Krennic into something like a Cartel Spacer plus Inferno 4, or whatever it is that you have, double 2 drop. You can even go like Crafty Smuggler plus Inferno 4 on turn 2. Those types of starts are what make it so that you can actually race a Sabine and actually win, which is pretty impressive. And one list that might be a little bit preemptive, I know some people aren't as convinced, but Anakin has been showing up a lot. So if you want to go ahead and bring in a list to take down Anakin, it's going to be Palpatine Yellow. Anakin Blue has been showing up a lot, and Palpatine Yellow has not really. We've been seeing a lot of Palpatine Blue, but Palpatine Yellow, realistically, what Anakin is trying to do is really leverage his action to just get so much extra value on a lot of units without actually having to pay for their power. So you get R2s and C3POs and you draw cards and things like that, or Yodas and you get to restore, but you don't have to pay for their power, and you get that with the Anakin action. Palpatine doesn't really care about his early game units. That is the key. A lot of it's just sentinels or ways to go ahead and sit there until we ramp. And then when we do ramp, we are the most powerful late game deck in the game. And that's the key with Palpatine, unless you're playing up against like a super hard control list. But even then, it can be still pretty competitive. Palpatine Yellow here, this list is extremely powerful. Again, there are different ways you can go about Palpatine Yellow, but the whole goal is you play a few early game units, maybe you defeat them, or maybe you just get a little bit of value like Poggle creates a bunch of battle droid tokens, Bazine messes with their hand, Yularen gives you some healing, Courier just has multiple units, P38 dies and deals some damage. You get to do essentially 3 damage to a unit with P38, right? You play it, 1 damage, you attack something, or you defeat it, and then you get 2 more damage to a unit, which can actually kill something off. And then when Anakin's coming down and you're like, oh boy, Anakin's coming down, well, guess what? You haven't actually put much damage on their base, so Anakin isn't a win con in of itself. And then the second thing is their big units you suddenly get to steal. And in the late game, that can be extremely powerful, since Anakin's oftentimes playing things like the Obi-Wans or the Luke Skywalkers, the Redemptions, or even the Profundities. And you've got bigger and more powerful things to be doing later on. You've got the Darth Vaders, the Devastators, the Change of Heart to grab one of their units and defeat it with a Palpatine and steal one of their units. This list just performs really well against those more mid-range strategies that are trying to curve out because of value. We just have so many things to kind of disrupt that game plan. I think one of the biggest things that's been really impressive with Palpatine is the fact that you actually have a lot of controlling elements in the early game because of these random, things that deal a little bit of damage and then finish them off while drawing cards with Palpatine. So you have a really big full hand when you get to Palpatine flip, and you have more powerful things to be doing in the late game, which just kind of dwarfs the heroism vigilance strategy that a lot of those decks, red-blue, are dealing with. And now time to talk about a list that I am going to be doing a full video on, if I haven't already. This is Obi Green. Now, this guy's been just kind of sneaking up and up and up for me. We talked about Obi Green in set 3 up against Cad Bane, but guess what? It's back, and it is performing pretty well up against Cad Bane still. There's a couple of things that got added with the new set 4 that really make it advantageous for you. But realistically, Obi-Wan was always a deck that was pretty good up against Cad Bane. And it's pretty straightforward. Obi-Wan negates all of Cad Bane's options. It also does decent against Quinlan. It's not favored. It does have a disfavorable matchup up against Quinlan, but the action does do good work against Quinlan. So a little bit of a nice bonus there. The whole game plan of Cad Bane is trying to get a little bit of value by playing their units, but you just get to heal up that value that they're trying to accrue as you go. And then the real key pet factor is the fact that Cad Bane comes down and this Obi-Wan just prevents that extra damage coming in by being a sentinel at the same time that Cad Bane comes down and really blocking the overall game plan. Couple that with the fact that you have Data Vault to get to 33 HP, and that you usually have a better late game. There's really 2 reasons why you have a better late game. The first reason is that Obi-Wan tends to be a better leader deploy than Cad Bane, which is a little bit surprising, but definitely does some major work. And the second thing is a combination of really just the late game power that you're going to have with Home 1 and Ewing reinforcements, of usually grabbing Luke Skywalker. Another really important card in this list is the Jedi lightsaber. And Cad Bane does not really focus in a whole lot on like dominating the space arena. If they were, this, Obi-Wan Sentinel wouldn't be quite as good. But with Obi-Wan being able to actually gum up the ground a lot, the Jedi lightsaber just becomes this brick wall that oftentimes Cad Bane cannot get through, especially since they usually rely on Cad Bane to kind of push in a little bit of damage to close out the game. This is really, really helpful to have the Jedi lightsaber plus Obi-Wan to do some work. And then, of course, we get the new You're All Clear kid. We get the new Luke Skywalker to potentially dominate the space arena. We have a bunch of restoring in Sindari, Yoda, etc. We got the new Chewbacca to really dominate the control matchups. We got a few more early game plays in Phoenix Squadron. Blue Leader is one of the best additions in this deck, just having an ambush for 5 in the ground or a 3/3 ambusher. And also Red Squadron X-Wing, really awesome because it can become a 3/4 that drew you a card, and that can be really good in a more slower paced deck, especially if you're looking for specific cards. So overall, this one's been pretty good up against Cad Bane, specifically Cad Bane Red. I think Cad Bane Green and Cad Bane Blue are going to be lists that are still slightly favored. Cad Bane Blue, I think, is a little bit stronger than Obi-Wan Green, but at least Cad Bane Green, it can definitely compete, and it can definitely be just a slightly favorable matchup, whereas the Cad Bane Red is really what you're considering with this Obi-Wan to kind of take down, mainly because they're not able to leverage their early game Tarkin Town to completely dominate you. You see something with Tarkin Town, guys? Maybe it's just if you're able to avoid Tarkin Town, you can actually win games. We talked about this with the Bossk Green too. Anyways, that's going to be the 4 decks that are a little bit more under the radar that can actually do some meta killing. And I know a lot of people are excited about trying to beat the meta with non-meta decks, so I figure it's worth a video. I will say, and I said this at the beginning, if you are looking to win a tournament, I would not recommend bringing any of these 4 lists unless it was like, oh, you are guaranteed to see 60% of the meta of one deck, right? That's where these niche counters come in. But if you're looking to go to Source Showdown and you're like, I'm tired of Quinlan, I'm tired of Cad Bane or whatnot, or you maybe just want to roll this up and have a good matchup against one of those meta decks, that's where these can potentially come in. And, you know, it's nice to know if you are those meta deck players, the Quinlan players or the Cad Bane players, just know you might come up across some of these and you might struggle a little bit more than you potentially thought if you had not known about them. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.